It happened in less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds that shattered everything Daniel Carter thought he knew about himself. The conference room in downtown New York was still buzzing after his presentation. Colleagues clustered in small groups, trading quick opinions and half smiles. Daniel was walking toward the exit when a voice cut through the chatter. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice the air. "Nice speech, Dan. Next time, maybe try sounding like a real leader instead of a self-help podcast." A few people laughed, the kind of laughter that isn't about humor, but about watching someone else get cut down. Daniel froze. His first instinct was the one most people have when publicly humiliated. Fight back, prove them wrong, hit twice as hard. His pulse pounded in his ears, every muscle tensing for a counterattack. But then, something strange happened. In that split second, as heat rose in his chest and a dozen biting comebacks formed in his mind, a single thought surfaced so clearly, it felt like someone else had whispered it to him. "You don't have to play this game." The thought stopped him. Cold. He realized that in this exact moment, his humiliation existed only if he accepted it. This man's words had no power unless Daniel decided to give them power. So he did nothing. No defense, no sarcastic retort, no attempt to reclaim the room. He just looked at the man, held his gaze with quiet steadiness, and walked past him toward the door. The air outside felt sharper, cleaner, like the city had been washed overnight. He could still hear the echoes of laughter behind him, but it no longer mattered. It was his mind, and for the first time, he understood it was his alone. That was the awakening, not a slow build-up over months of self-help books or motivational speeches. Just one moment, a split-second realization that nobody, not your boss, not your critics, not the crowd, can control your inner world unless you hand them the keys. On the streets of New York, Daniel saw the truth everywhere. People honking at each other in traffic, strangers yelling into their phones, faces tightening in reaction to things they couldn't control. It was as if the whole city was trapped in a game where everyone surrendered their peace to whoever could trigger them the fastest. That day, he stepped out of the game. It wasn't easy. The mind craves reaction because reaction feels like winning. Silence feels like losing, at least at first. But Daniel noticed something unsettling. When he refused to respond, the man who insulted him didn't win either. In fact, he looked thrown off, as if the script had suddenly been rewritten. Most people are prepared for a fight. Almost no one is prepared for calm. That's when Daniel discovered the first building block of an unshakable mind: control over your reactions. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control, the idea that life is divided into two categories: what you can control and what you can't. The words of others, outside your control. Your reaction to those words, completely within it. In a world obsessed with instant replies, clapping back, and proving yourself online, this skill is rare, and because it's rare, it's powerful. Your silence can feel heavier than 1,000 words. Your calm can feel like armor no one can penetrate. Daniel began testing himself with a practice he called the Silent 60. Whenever someone said something offensive or provoked him, he would wait 60 seconds before responding. In those 60 seconds, he asked himself one question: will reacting make my life better or worse? Often, he found the urge to lash out faded before the minute was over. And here's the thing about practicing control: it changes how people see you. Some start to respect you more, drawn to the steadiness you project. Others find it unnerving, almost intimidating, because they can't get a rise out of you. Either way, you're no longer the easy target you once were. That single day in New York didn't just teach Daniel a lesson, it changed the direction of his life. He would go on to face far greater challenges than an insult at a conference. But the seed of strength had been planted. Once you've tasted what it's like to own your mind, you can't go back to letting anyone else run it. Before we go deeper into Daniel's journey and the exact steps he used to build a mind so strong. It unsettled the people around him. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you powerful stories like this one. Every new subscriber is a reminder that these ideas matter, and it keeps us motivated to create the kind of content that can change the way you see yourself and the world. And now, a quick question for you. Imagine you're in Daniel's place. Someone publicly insults you in front of a group. Do you A. respond immediately to defend yourself? B. stay silent and walk away? Comment your answer below with just A or B. I'm curious to see how many of you would choose each path. Chicago's winter hit Daniel Carter like a physical challenge the moment he arrived. The wind tore through the streets with a sharpness that felt personal, slicing through layers of clothing as if to test his resolve. He had come here for a clean break after losing his job in New York, but the truth was, the move was less about opportunity and more about survival. His life had unraveled quickly, and he needed a place where he could strip everything down and start again. In the early days, the loss felt heavy in a way that was hard to describe. It wasn't just the absence of a paycheck. It was the quiet erosion of identity, the nagging thought that maybe he had been fooling himself about who he was and what he could handle. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream, but instead settles into your bones, quietly convincing you that it might never leave. That was the pain Daniel carried with him into Chicago. Instead of avoiding it, he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would not hide from the discomfort. He would walk toward it. That decision began with taking a job most people in his position would have considered beneath them, unloading trucks at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was grueling work, the kind that chewed up your muscles and left your hands raw. The shift started before dawn, in freezing air that turned his breath into smoke. There were no comforting words, no encouragement, just weight to carry and time to endure. At first, Daniel thought of the job as temporary, a stopgap until something better came along. But after a few weeks, he began to see it differently. The work wasn't humiliating, it was humbling. And in that humility, he found something he hadn't felt in months: progress. Each box he lifted, each hour spent in the cold, each day he showed up when he didn't feel like it became a small victory. Slowly, the pain that had once felt like a dead weight began to feel like resistance in a gym. It wasn't there to stop him. It was there to make him stronger. He remembered a concept he had once read about, called amor fati, the love of one's fate. The Stoics didn't just talk about accepting hardship. They talked about embracing it, even loving it, because it was the raw material from which greatness could be built. Daniel began to practice this deliberately. When the cold bit at his skin, he welcomed it. When the work seemed endless, he reminded himself that this was training, not punishment. Pain, he realized, was a forge, and like metal in the fire, he was being reshaped. This mindset spilled into other parts of his life. He started experimenting with small acts of voluntary discomfort, pushing himself into situations that forced him to confront the edges of his comfort zone. Cold showers in the morning, long walks in the Chicago winter without gloves or headphones, giving up coffee for a month just to see if he could break the habit. These choices were not about proving toughness to anyone else. They were about proving to himself that he could endure, adapt, and grow. One ritual in particular stayed with him. Before sunrise, Daniel would step outside for what he called the cold morning walk. 10 minutes of slow, deliberate movement through the biting air, focusing only on his breath and the sensation of the cold. It was both meditation and confrontation. Every step said, "I am here, I am enduring, and I am unafraid of discomfort." Over time, those walks became a reminder that life's difficulties often felt smaller. After you had voluntarily chosen to face harder things, the change was subtle but undeniable. Situations that once would have thrown him into panic now barely registered as more than inconveniences. An unexpected bill was no longer a crisis, but a problem to solve. A rejection email was not a wound, but a redirection. Traffic delays, rude strangers, small setbacks. They had lost their power over him. It wasn't that life had suddenly become easier. It was that Daniel had become harder to break. Pain no longer had the same sting because it was no longer unfamiliar. He had learned to see it as a companion, sometimes unwelcome, but always carrying a lesson worth understanding. Looking back, Daniel would realize that the Chicago winter didn't just test him, it forged him. Every frozen morning, every aching muscle, every day spent doing work that most people would overlook had been a lesson in resilience. Pain had shifted from being the enemy to being the teacher. And when you make that shift, the world changes. Hardship becomes training, fear becomes fuel, and the armor you build is invisible but impossible to penetrate. Daniel had no illusions that his life from here would be free of struggle. In fact, he expected more of it, but he welcomed it now because he understood something he hadn't before. Pain isn't just a thing to survive, it's a tool, and in the right hands, it can make you unshakable. Seattle was not a city that made discipline easy. The steady drizzle seemed to dull ambition, turning days into a gray blur. It was the kind of place where people lingered in coffee shops for hours, where procrastination could be disguised as a lifestyle. For Daniel Carter, arriving here was another fresh start, but this time he wasn't trying to survive loss. He was trying to build something invisible, a kind of strength that didn't announce itself, but was felt in every choice. He realized early on that discipline is not about grand gestures or public victories. It's about the moments no one sees, the decisions that feel too small to matter until they quietly shape who you are. The world often praises results, but rarely pays attention to the process that produces them. Daniel decided that his process would be sacred, even if it was unseen. He began with his mornings. In Chicago, he had learned to welcome discomfort. In Seattle, he learned to protect his first hours like a fortress. He called it the morning fortress, and nothing was allowed to breach it. The first hour belonged entirely to reflection. No phone, no emails, no news. Just pen on paper, emptying his mind onto a journal. Sometimes the entries were thoughtful. Other times they were messy, full of questions without answers. But the point wasn't perfection, it was honesty. The act itself grounded him in a way that made the rest of the day feel steadier. The second hour was devoted to movement. If it wasn't raining too hard, he would jog along the waterfront, breathing in the damp air, feeling the rhythm of his body waking up. On heavier rain days, he stayed indoors, stretching and doing bodyweight exercises with slow precision. This wasn't about chasing a certain look or counting calories. It was about reminding himself that his body was an ally, a vessel that needed care to support a resilient mind. The third hour was for silence. Daniel would prepare breakfast without music, without podcasts, without distraction. At first it felt strange to be alone with nothing but the quiet and the sound of rain outside his window. But in that quiet, he began to hear the undercurrent of his own thoughts. He noticed how much of his life had been spent reacting to noise, and how rare it was to simply exist without input. He adopted the habit of journaling not as a nostalgic nod to philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, but as a tool for precision. On the pages, he tracked his emotional triggers, moments of weakness, and small victories. He didn't lie to himself, and he didn't censor his words. Over time, these pages became a map of his inner landscape. He could see patterns emerging, situations that stirred anger, people who brought out his best self, choices that consistently led to peace or turmoil. With that knowledge, he could prepare for life, instead of being blindsided by it. To sharpen this practice, Daniel created what he called the 30-day inner audit. For a month, he committed to observing himself as if from the outside. Every time he felt a rush of irritation, fear, or anxiety, he wrote it down. Every time he acted out of impulse instead of reason, it went in the journal. At the end of the month, he didn't just have a record of mistakes. He had a blueprint for improvement. The effects were subtle at first. His friends noticed he seemed calmer, but couldn't point to anything specific. They didn't see the 5 a.m. alarms, the skipped hours of scrolling, the deliberate choice to end conversations that drained his energy. They didn't see the quiet battles he won before most people had started their day. That was fine with Daniel. Discipline wasn't about being admired. It was about building a mind so steady that when chaos arrived, it found no purchase. The beauty of unseen discipline is that it compounds. A single decision to wake early doesn't change much, but 1,000 mornings of choosing reflection over distraction rewires the way you approach the world. Skipping one pointless argument doesn't transform you, but a year of avoiding the traps that steal your peace makes you unrecognizable to your former self. Daniel began to understand why the Stoics spoke of self-mastery as the highest victory. No one could see the hours he spent preparing for challenges that might never come. No one could measure the weight of temptations he quietly refused. But in the moments that mattered, the results spoke for themselves. He no longer felt the need to prove anything outwardly. The proof was in the steadiness he carried into every situation. There was no ceremony, no applause. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every small, invisible choice was a brick in the fortress he was building inside himself. A fortress no storm could shake. The heat in Austin clung to the air like a heavy curtain the day Daniel Carter walked into his cousin's backyard for a long-awaited family reunion. The smell of grilled food and the hum of conversation filled the space. But beneath the laughter, there was an undercurrent of tension he had expected. Families carry histories, and Daniel's was no different. Some conflicts fade with time, others merely go dormant, waiting for the right spark to reignite them. He had barely set his plate down when it came. His uncle, a man with a sharp tongue and a habit of disguising hostility as humor, smirked across the table. "So, Daniel, still doing that? Whatever it is you call a career these days." The words weren't loud, but they had a precision that aimed straight for pride. A few people nearby chuckled, eager to see how Daniel would respond. In the past, that kind of comment would have drawn him into a verbal duel. He would have fired back, proving his worth with cutting words of his own. But this time, he saw something different. Daniel had come to understand that not every attack needed to be blocked head-on. Some could be redirected, their energy dissolved before they landed. He looked at his uncle, let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle the moment, and replied evenly, "Yes, I've been taking on projects that push me to see what I'm really capable of." His voice carried no edge, no defensiveness, only calm certainty. It was a response that acknowledged the question without feeding the insult, like water flowing around a stone instead of trying to break it. This was what Daniel thought of as emotional jujitsu, the art of turning emotional force back on itself without meeting it with equal aggression. He had learned that people often strike out from their own insecurity or frustration. Meeting them with anger only fueled the fire. Meeting them with cold detachment could shut them down, but it also built walls. The real mastery was in reframing the exchange so that no one lost face, yet the attack lost its bite. Throughout the day, Daniel practiced this quietly. When a relative brought up an old disagreement, he asked a question instead of defending his side. When a cousin teased him about not being married yet, he smiled and asked about their kids, shifting the focus away from himself. He noticed how each time he chose this path, the tension eased, and the conversation moved on without lingering resentment. The Stoics had long spoken about the power of perception. An insult was not an objective truth. It was only words until you gave it meaning. By controlling the meaning, you controlled the outcome. Daniel's approach was not about pretending the sting wasn't there. It was about refusing to let that sting dictate his actions. Later in the evening, as the heat gave way to the softer glow of sunset, Daniel found himself in a quieter conversation with his uncle. Away from the crowd, the man spoke in a tone that carried less bravado. He had recently lost his job and was feeling uncertain about his future. The earlier comment now made sense. It had been less about Daniel's life choices and more about the uncle's own unease. Daniel listened, asked questions, and offered no judgment. Sometimes, disarming a person wasn't about winning an argument. It was about showing them you weren't their enemy to begin with. Emotional jujitsu, Daniel realized, was less about clever tactics and more about presence. It required seeing the moment clearly, resisting the urge to react impulsively, and choosing a response that shifted the energy instead of escalating it. It was about holding your ground without turning the exchange into a battlefield. When the reunion wound down, Daniel left without any lingering frustration. The old patterns had been tested, and this time they hadn't held. He had navigated the day without sacrificing his calm or his integrity. The strength he carried wasn't loud or obvious. It didn't need to be. Those who had tried to provoke him had found no easy target, and those who had spoken with him left feeling heard rather than defeated as he drove away through the warm Texas night. Daniel thought about how many people spend their lives bracing against the next conflict, building armor so thick that nothing can touch them, only to find themselves isolated and rigid. The real skill, he knew now, was to be unshakable, yet flexible, to absorb tension without letting it poison you, to move through challenges without losing your center. Emotional jujitsu wasn't just a way of handling difficult people. It was a way of walking through the world without carrying unnecessary battles on your back. Yellowstone National Park was not silent in the way Daniel Carter expected. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of a different kind of noise. Wind pushing through the pines, the distant rush of water over rock, the occasional call of an unseen bird. It was a living silence, layered and textured, the kind that made you realize how loud your mind had been for years without you noticing. Daniel had come here alone, leaving his phone locked in the glove compartment of his car. No work emails, no messages, no news feeds pulling him toward the next outrage. The first day felt like withdrawal. He caught himself reaching for a device that wasn't there, feeling the phantom buzz of notifications that never came. By the second day, the craving had dulled. By the third, it had faded almost entirely, replaced by something else, a sharpness of perception he hadn't felt in years. Walking along a narrow trail at sunrise, he noticed the way the light broke over the mountains, spilling gold into the valleys. He watched steam curl upward from a hot spring, the air shimmering above it. He could feel the weight of his own steps, each one deliberate, grounded. It struck him how little attention he usually paid to his surroundings. Life in the city had been a constant layering of distraction over distraction. Out here, there was no filter between him and the world. The Stoics had spoken of retreating inward, not as an escape from life, but as a way to return to it with greater clarity. Daniel felt the truth of that in every quiet hour he spent in the park. Without the constant hum of information, his thoughts became clearer, slower. Questions he had been avoiding rose to the surface. What was he building his life toward? Which parts of his routine were truly necessary, and which were just noise dressed up as productivity? He kept a small notebook in his jacket pocket, jotting down ideas as they came. Some were practical, projects he wanted to start, habits he wanted to refine. Others were questions with no immediate answers, left on the page to be revisited later. The act of writing them down felt like clearing space in a crowded room. By the middle of the trip, Daniel had stopped measuring time in hours and started measuring it in experiences. The sound of a creek at dawn, the sudden appearance of a deer on the trail, the way the night sky looked without city lights to wash it out. Each moment felt like a reminder that life had always been this rich, but he had been too busy chasing after the next thing to notice. When he returned to camp in the evenings, he built a fire and sat by it without music or books, letting the flames pull his attention into their slow, steady dance. At first, it felt unproductive. Then he realized that was the point. Not every moment needed to be filled, optimized, or explained. Some moments existed only to be experienced. On the 8th day, while hiking a ridge, a storm rolled in over the mountains. The clouds darkened quickly, the wind rising as if to test him. He stood there, feeling the shift in the air, and understood something the Stoics had been trying to teach all along. You cannot stop the storm. You cannot demand the wind to soften or the rain to wait. But you can choose how you stand in it. You can choose to see it not as a threat, but as part of the landscape. That night, under a tarp that rattled with rain, Daniel decided to bring a piece of this quiet back with him. He created a rule for himself. One day every week, with no screens, no digital noisy, no unnecessary communication, just a day to live above the noise, the way he had in Yellowstone. It wouldn't be as dramatic as the wilderness, but the principle was the same. When he eventually drove away from the park, phone powered off in the passenger seat, he felt no rush to turn it back on. The world would still be there, full of its demands and distractions, ready to pull at him again. But now he knew how to rise above it. The noise could still exist. It just no longer had to own him. Boston's rain had a way of softening the edges of the city. The streets glistened under a thin layer of water, and the air carried that cool, metallic scent that follows a storm. Daniel Carter sat alone in the corner of a small coffee shop, a book open in front of him, his posture relaxed, his focus unbroken. Around him, conversations rose and fell, espresso machines hissed, and the door opened and closed with the steady rhythm of strangers coming and going, yet none of it seemed to touch him. It was not that he ignored the noise, but that he moved within it, as though it were part of the background. People noticed. A woman at the table beside him glanced over twice, without realizing why. A man in line lowered his voice when he caught Daniel's calm, steady gaze drifting toward the window. It was subtle, but it was there. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, yet drew it naturally. This was the result of years of work that no one had seen. New York had taught him to guard his reactions. Chicago had taught him to turn pain into strength. Seattle had taught him that discipline was built in private. Austin had taught him to redirect conflict instead of fueling it. Yellowstone had shown him the value of living above the noise. And now, here in Boston, he carried all of it without effort. It was no longer something he performed. It was simply who he was. True presence is felt before it is understood. It is in the steadiness of your movements, the way you occupy space without shrinking or pushing, the way you listen without rushing to speak. Daniel had stopped trying to prove anything a long time ago, and in that letting go, he had become more persuasive, more respected, and strangely, more intimidating. Not because he projected aggression, but because he could not be moved by it. One afternoon, a younger colleague from his new consulting work approached him in a panic. She had made a costly error on a project and was certain it would damage her career. Her words tumbled out quickly, her breath uneven. Daniel didn't interrupt. He waited until she had said everything she needed to say, then asked a single question. What's the worst possible outcome here? The question stopped her. Together, they walked through each scenario, stripping away the exaggerated fears until only the real, manageable problem remained. She left with a plan and, more importantly, the sense that she was capable of fixing it. Moments like that were becoming more common. People sought him out not because he had all the answers, but because he offered something rarer, an unshakable calm in a world that seemed designed to keep people on edge. He understood now that strength was not just about endurance or control, but about the ability to steady others simply by being steady yourself. Daniel kept a habit he called the Stoic walk, Once or twice a week, he would move slowly through public spaces, the harbor, the park, a busy market, noticing details others missed. The texture of old bricks under his hand, the way light shifted through the trees, the expressions of people as they moved past one another. It was a practice in being fully present, in carrying himself with deliberate awareness. Over time, it gave his movements a quality that people subconsciously responded to. He knew some found his composure unsettling. There were those who thrived on provoking others, who felt uneasy when their usual tactics failed. But there were also those who felt safer in his presence, who recognized that his steadiness came not from superiority, but from self-mastery. Both reactions told him the same thing. The work he had done to build his mind had changed how the world moved around him. On a gray Boston morning, as Daniel stepped outside the coffee shop and into the light drizzle, he reflected on the journey. The goal had never been to scare people, but rather to free himself from the grip of anything that could shake him. Yet in achieving that, he had learned something unexpected. A mind that cannot be owned, swayed, or manipulated will naturally stand apart. It will unsettle those who rely on chaos to control others. It will inspire those searching for stability. And so he walked through the rain with the quiet certainty that the strength he carried now was not something anyone could give him or take away. It had been built in moments of pain, in silence, in discipline, in conflict, in nature, and in the stillness of his own mind. That kind of strength did not need to be announced. It was felt, and for those who noticed, it was unforgettable. Daniel Carter's journey began with a single moment in New York City, a moment so brief it could have been forgotten, a public insult, a room full of eyes waiting for his reaction, and a choice that would set the tone for the rest of his life. Instead of firing back, he walked away. In that quiet act, he discovered a truth that would become his foundation. No one could own his mind unless he gave them permission. That realization was not just about controlling a reaction. It was about reclaiming the keys to his inner world, the very core of his peace and power. From there, his life became a series of deliberate transformations. Chicago was his trial by fire, or rather, his trial by ice. Stripped of his old identity, after losing his job, he walked directly into hardship instead of running from it. Unloading trucks in the freezing dawn, feeling the sting of the wind on his face, he began to see pain differently. It was no longer something to fear. It was a forge, shaping him into something stronger than before. Through voluntary discomfort, in the embrace of amor fati, he learned to love fate, to see every difficulty as training rather than punishment. Seattle was the workshop where his discipline was honed in private, while others saw only the surface, a calm voice, a measured presence. They had no idea about the mornings he built, like fortresses. No phone, no noise, just journaling, movement, and silence. There were no applause and no witnesses. This was where the real work happened. In the hours before the world even noticed he was awake, the 30-day inner audit taught him to spot patterns in his own emotions, to identify the triggers that could steal his peace before they had the chance. Austin tested him in a different way. Family dynamics, old grudges, and cutting remarks could have pulled him back into the emotional battles of the past. Instead, he mastered what he called emotional jujitsu, not blocking an attack head-on, but redirecting it, diffusing its power, and sometimes uncovering the pain behind it. He learned that the goal wasn't to win every interaction, but to walk away without carrying the weight of unnecessary battles. In doing so, he left space for understanding to take root where conflict might have thrived. Yellowstone stripped away the digital noise and brought him face to face with the reality of his own thoughts. Alone with nature, Daniel discovered the power of living above the noise, of removing the constant stream of stimulation to allow clarity to return. He began to measure his days not by hours, but by moments, the curve of steam from a hot spring, the sudden appearance of wildlife, the way the mountains held the sunrise. He brought back from the wilderness a new habit. One day each week without screens. A reset for the mind, in a world that never stops shouting. Boston was where it all came together. Years of unseen labor had turned into something others could sense without understanding. He no longer had to try to project confidence or calm. It was simply part of him. His presence could steady those in panic and quietly unsettle those who relied on provoking others. The Stoic walk kept him grounded in the present, moving through life with deliberate awareness. He had not built his mind to intimidate, yet its strength was undeniable, and in that strength others found either discomfort or inspiration. The lesson from Daniel's journey is as simple as it is profound. A strong mind is not built in the public eye. It is forged in private moments of choice, in the willingness to face discomfort, in the commitment to discipline, in the art of handling conflict with grace, in the courage to embrace silence, and in the patience to let all of these changes take root until they become who you are. In today's world, where outrage is currency and distraction is constant, this kind of inner strength is rare, but it is possible for anyone willing to do the work. Start small, practice pausing before you respond. Introduce voluntary discomfort into your life so that challenges lose their power to intimidate you. Protect your mornings or evenings as time for reflection. Learn to listen deeply, especially when someone is trying to provoke you. Set aside time to disconnect from the noise and reconnect with yourself. Over time, these habits will not just make you calmer, they will make you unshakable. Daniel's story is not about becoming invincible. It is about becoming free from the control of others, free from the fear of discomfort, free from the pull of distractions, and free from the need to prove anything to anyone. When you carry that kind of freedom inside you, the world notices. Some people will be drawn to it, others will be unsettled by it, but either way, you will move through life knowing that nothing outside you can shake what you have built within. Now I want to hear from you. In your opinion, what is the single most important quality in building a mind that cannot be shaken? Is it control over your reactions, the ability to endure discomfort, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can learn from each other's perspectives. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps us creating more stories like this. Stories that not only inspire, but also give you the tools to live differently. Every subscriber reminds us that these lessons matter, and together, we can keep bringing them to life.